I have spent 30 years studying armored warfare. I have watched tank columns advance across desert terrain, analyzed after-action reports from every major armored engagement since Desert Storm, and sat in Pentagon briefing rooms where generals spoke with absolute confidence about the invincibility of modern combined arms doctrine. Nothing, not 1 hour of that experience, prepared me for what the imagery coming out of the northern Negev is showing this morning. 47 Merkava IV main battle tanks gone, not damaged, not disabled, gone, reduced to blackened hulls sitting in the desert like tombstones for a doctrine that died overnight. Another 63 armored personnel carriers destroyed across the front, stretching 12 kilometers. An entire IDF armored division, one of the most heavily equipped and most expensively maintained ground combat formations on the planet, systematically dismantled in under 4 hours by 2,000 Iranian suicide drones that operated with a coordination and a targeting precision I have never seen applied against armor at this scale. I want to be honest with you about something. When I first reviewed the initial damage reports this morning, my instinct was to question the numbers, not because I doubted Iranian capability. I stopped doing that years ago, long before most people in Washington were willing to, but because the scale of armored destruction in a single engagement of this duration simply has no precedent in the post-Cold War era. Then the satellite confirmation came through. Then the drone footage. Then the ground level imagery that is now circulating despite Israeli military censorship attempts. And I realized the numbers were not exaggerated. If anything, they were conservative. What happened in the northern Negev last night is not a battle. It is a demonstration. Iran just showed the entire world that the age of the main battle tank as the decisive instrument of ground warfare is over, and it made that demonstration against the most capable armored force in the Middle East, using weapons that cost a fraction of what the tanks they destroyed are worth, built entirely within the borders of a country that has been under comprehensive sanctions for 50 years. Tel Aviv is panicking this morning. It should be. But the panic in Tel Aviv is nothing compared to the quiet, controlled alarm spreading through every armored brigade headquarters from Warsaw to Seoul right now, as commanders who spent their careers inside tanks begin to absorb the implications of what just happened to the Merkava. In the next hour, I am going to walk you through everything. How did 2,000 drones execute a coordinated assault against dispersed armored formations across a 12-kilometer front with the precision needed to achieve this level of kill ratio? And what does that targeting architecture tell us about Iranian drone warfare doctrine? What specific vulnerabilities in the Merkava IV's design were identified and exploited? And why does the answer to that question terrify every tank manufacturer currently pitching next-generation armor to NATO clients? Why did Washington's response to the destruction of an entire Israeli armored division amount to carefully worded statements and quietly repositioned naval assets rather than the decisive intervention that decades of alliance rhetoric promised? And when an army loses its armored strike capacity in a single engagement, what options remain, and are any of them options that a rational government would actually choose? Before we go any further, if you are watching this channel for the first time, subscribe now. What I am going to lay out in this analysis is not available in the mainstream coverage. It never is, because the mainstream coverage is structured around managing perception rather than delivering accuracy. Like this video, share it with anyone who is trying to understand what is actually happening in this conflict. And leave your assessment in the comments. I read them, and the conversation that happens there matters. Now let us get into it. Let me set the operational scene precisely, because the details matter enormously for understanding why this engagement unfolded the way it did. The IDF armored formation targeted in this operation was the 401st Armored Brigade, one of the most decorated and most capable ground combat units in the Israeli military. Equipped with Merkava IV main battle tanks and Namer heavy armored personnel carriers, operating in coordination with Namer infantry fighting vehicles and self-propelled artillery, this was not a garrison unit or a reserve formation. This was a frontline combat brigade at full operational readiness, deployed in the northern Negev in a configuration designed to support potential offensive operations northward while maintaining defensive depth against threats from multiple directions. The brigade was not stationary. This is a critical point that the initial reporting has largely missed. The formation was conducting a deliberate movement, a tactical repositioning from assembly areas toward forward staging positions when the first Iranian drone wave arrived. Movement is supposed to be an advantage for armored forces, making them harder to target than static positions. On this night, movement worked against them. The thermal signature of 60-plus tank engines operating simultaneously, the dust signatures of tracked vehicles moving across dry terrain, the electromagnetic emissions from the formation's command and communications vehicles, all of these combined to create a targeting picture for Iranian drone operators that was, if anything, clearer than a static formation would have provided. The Iranian strike was organized in 4 waves, each with a distinct tactical purpose that reflected a level of armored warfare, understanding that, I have to say, honestly surprised me. Not because I underestimated Iranian military sophistication, but because the specific application of drone swarm tactics against armor at this level of precision represents a doctrinal development that most Western analysts had assessed as at least 2 to 3 years away from operational maturity. The first wave consisted of approximately 400 Shahed 136 platforms configured for area reconnaissance and initial target designation. These were not attack drones in this phase. They were acting as a distributed sensor network, building a real-time targeting picture of the formation's precise composition, spacing, and movement vectors. The imagery and electromagnetic data collected by this first wave was processed and transmitted to the Strike Coordination Center within minutes, generating individual target assignments for the attack waves that followed. The second wave, approximately 600 Shade, 238 jet-powered variants, arrived 18 minutes after the first, executing direct attack profiles against the Merkava tanks identified as highest priority targets. The Shahed 238's higher speed, over 350 kilometers per hour, compressed the engagement window for the formation's defensive systems to under 90 seconds per target. The brigade's organic air defense assets, primarily Stinger man-portable systems and a single battery of short-range radar-guided guns, were simply unable to process the volume of simultaneous threats arriving from multiple vectors. They achieved some intercepts. The post-engagement debris field includes the wreckage of an estimated 80 to 100 drones that were successfully engaged. But against 600 simultaneous attack profiles arriving from 4 different compass points, the intercept rate of approximately 15% left the armor almost completely unprotected. The third wave targeted the formation's supporting elements, the Namer, APCs, the artillery units, the command vehicles, and critically, the fuel and ammunition resupply trucks that were traveling with the formation. This targeting logic reflected a sophisticated understanding of armored logistics. Destroying tanks is valuable, but destroying the resupply infrastructure that sustains a tank formation prevents any surviving tanks from remaining operationally relevant. By eliminating the fuel trucks, the ammunition carriers, and the maintenance vehicles in this third wave, Iran ensured that even tanks that survived the initial attack would become immobile and combat ineffective within hours. The fourth and final wave, approximately 400 platforms, conducted what I can only describe as a cleanup operation. These drones specifically targeted vehicles that had been identified as damaged but not destroyed in the earlier waves, completing the destruction of assets that had survived initial hits and ensuring that the formation's combat capability was comprehensively eliminated rather than merely degraded. The final damage count that emerged from Israeli military assessments in the hours after the engagement: 47 Merkava IV tanks destroyed, 23 additional Merkava IV tanks damaged and non-operational, 63 Namer APCs and IFVs destroyed, 31 artillery pieces destroyed or damaged, 28 logistics vehicles destroyed, and an estimated 340 IDF personnel killed or wounded, the largest single engagement casualty figure for Israeli ground forces in decades. The kill ratio achieved in this engagement, measured in terms of attacking asset cost versus defending asset costs destroyed, is frankly unlike anything in the historical record of armored warfare. A Merkava IV cost approximately $3.5 million per unit. The 47 destroyed represent approximately $165 million in tank losses alone, not counting the Namers, the artillery, and the logistics vehicles. The total armored formation losses represent somewhere in the range of $400 to $500 million in destroyed equipment. The 2,000 drones that achieved this destruction carry a combined production cost estimated at between $40 and $100 million, depending on variant mix and production pricing. Iran destroyed between $400 and $500 million worth of Israeli military hardware using weapons that cost somewhere between 1/10 and 1/4 of the value they destroyed. That exchange ratio is not a tactical result. It is a strategic verdict on the future of armored warfare. The Merkava IV is genuinely one of the finest main battle tanks ever produced. I say that without reservation and without any desire to diminish Israeli engineering achievement. The Merkava's design philosophy, placing the engine in the front to provide additional crew protection, incorporating the trophy active protection system for defeating incoming missiles and rocket-propelled grenades, optimizing the internal layout for crew survivability, reflects decades of hard-won combat experience translated into steel and electronics. Against the threats it was designed to defeat, it performs exceptionally well. The problem is that it was not designed to defeat what hit it last night. The Merkava IV's trophy active protection system is one of the most capable hard-kill defensive systems currently installed on any production tank. It detects incoming projectiles using radar, calculates intercept solutions in milliseconds, and fires a shotgun-like blast of fragmentation charges to destroy or deflect the incoming round before it reaches the tank. Against RPG, 7S, Kornet anti-tank missiles, and similar direct fire threats, Trophy is devastatingly effective. The Israeli military has accumulated extensive combat experience with the system, and its performance record against conventional anti-armor threats is genuinely impressive. Against a Shahed 238 drone arriving from directly overhead at 350 kilometers per hour. Trophy's engagement geometry becomes problematic in ways that were apparently not fully appreciated before this engagement. The system's radar coverage has known limitations in the upper hemisphere. The threat geometry for which it was optimized is a relatively flat trajectory incoming from ground level not a steep diving attack from altitude. The drones that achieved the highest kill rate against Merkava IV tanks in this engagement were specifically those that executed a near vertical terminal dive approaching from directly above the turret, where trophy coverage is weakest and where the tank's armor is thinnest. This is not a secret. The Merkava IV's roof armor, while thicker than most contemporary tanks, is significantly thinner than its frontal armor. This is true of virtually every main battle tank in service because the traditional threat environment for armor has been dominated by direct fire weapons arriving from roughly horizontal angles. The transition to top attack munitions, javelin missiles, brimstone, the NLAW has been reshaping this calculation for years, and every serious armor designer has been working on the problem. But fitting a production tank with active protection that can reliably engage a swarm of 50 simultaneous top attack threats arriving within a 30-second window is an unsolved engineering problem. It remains unsolved, and Iran's targeting planners knew that. The specific attack profile that achieved the highest lethality against the Merkava IV formation was a coordinated two-drone engagement sequence that has not been publicly documented before in operational conditions. The first drone in each pairing approached at medium altitude from the formation's front or flank, triggering trophy engagement and consuming one of the system's limited ready-to-fire defensive charges. The second drone, arriving from a different vector approximately 4 to 6 seconds later with the trophy system and reload cycle, executed the top attack profile against the now partially unprotected tank. This paired engagement tactic, deliberately sequenced to exploit Trophy's reload vulnerability, reflects a targeting doctrine that required specific knowledge of the Trophy system's operational characteristics, including its engagement cycling time. Where did that knowledge come from? The honest answer is that Trophy's operational characteristics are not a closely held secret among serious military analysts. The system has been in operational service for over 15 years. Its engagement parameters have been observed, analyzed, and published in open source military literature. Any serious military engineering organization that decided to design a drone employment tactic specifically to defeat Trophy would have had access to the information needed to do so. Iran's aerospace and defense engineering community is serious. They did the work. The broader lesson here extends far beyond the Merkava and Trophy to the fundamental question of what active protection systems can and cannot accomplish against drone swarms. Trophy and its equivalents, the Russian Arena, the American Iron Curtain program, the German AMAP-ODS, were all conceived within a threat model that assumed a relatively small number of simultaneous incoming threats arriving from geometrically limited vectors at speeds and approach angles characteristic of conventional anti-armor weapons. The 2,000 drone swarm that engaged the 401st Brigade last night operates outside every parameter of that threat model simultaneously. The number of simultaneous threats exceeds any reasonable active protection magazine capacity. The vector diversity threats arriving from front, flanks, rear, and directly overhead simultaneously exceeds the coverage geometry of any single active protection architecture. And the specific exploitation of reload cycles and coverage gaps reflects a tactical intelligence that passive armor and active protection systems alone cannot counter. The implication for NATO armor programs is direct and urgent. Every next-generation tank program currently in development, the German KF-51 Panther, the American NGCV program, the British Challenger 3 upgrade, incorporates active protection as a central survivability feature. The engagement at the Northern Negev has just demonstrated in operational conditions that active protection alone is insufficient against a sufficiently large and intelligently coordinated drone swarm. The procurement programs that were sold to defense ministries on the basis of active protection providing near comprehensive survivability against anti-armor threats need to be reviewed. The threat model has changed. The procurement assumptions have not caught up. Iran's ability to execute this engagement depended critically on the guidance and coordination architecture underlying the drone swarm, the software and communications infrastructure that assigned individual targets to individual drones, managed the sequenced attack timing, and coordinated the four-wave strike structure across a 12-kilometer front in real time. This is not a capability that can be assembled from commercially available components. It represents years of dedicated development in drone swarm coordination algorithms, secure communications architecture, and real-time battlefield management software. The fact that it performed at this level in operational conditions against a moving armored formation is a significant intelligence revelation about the maturity of Iranian drone warfare capability that the Western analytical community will be processing for months. I want to talk about what Washington did last night, and more importantly, what Washington did not do, because I think the American response to the destruction of an entire Israeli armored division tells us more about the actual state of the U.S.-Israel alliance than any number of congressional speeches or White House press briefings. What Washington did: issued a statement expressing deep concern, reaffirmed its commitment to Israel's security, announced an acceleration of munitions deliveries, and quietly repositioned two destroyer-class vessels that had been operating in the Eastern Mediterranean to stations further from the Lebanese coastline. What Washington did not do: order American air assets to strike the Iranian drone launch facilities that executed this operation. Did not activate the prepositioned American ground forces in the region for any form of direct intervention. Did not invoke any of the mutual defense frameworks that decades of alliance rhetoric have implied would be automatically triggered by an attack of this magnitude against Israeli forces. I want to be very direct about why, because I think the explanation that will be offered that American restraint reflects diplomatic sophistication and measured escalation management is a cover story for a simpler reality. The United States did not intervene directly because the cost-benefit calculation of direct intervention against Iran in the current environment does not favor intervention. It is that straightforward. And the fact that Washington reached that conclusion within hours of the largest single engagement destruction of Israeli armor in history tells you everything you need to know about the actual, as opposed to the rhetorical American commitment to Israeli security. The specific calculus that drove Washington's restraint is not difficult to reconstruct. Direct American military strikes against Iranian drone launch facilities would require penetrating Iranian airspace. Iranian air defense, while not equivalent to Russian or Chinese capability, has been significantly enhanced over the past decade through a combination of domestic development and foreign acquisition. American strike packages operating against hardened Iranian targets would face meaningful attrition risk, not the risk-free operations that characterized American air campaigns against the relatively primitive air defenses of Iraq, Libya, or Syria. The political cost of American aircraft losses over Iran in the current domestic political environment is a cost that no administration wants to absorb. Beyond the immediate operational risk, direct American military action against Iran would trigger escalatory responses that extend far beyond the immediate theater. Iranian retaliation against American bases in Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and the UAE, all of which are within range of Iranian ballistic and cruise missile systems, would produce American casualties and damaged infrastructure that the public and congressional response to would be politically unmanageable. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz, even temporarily, would produce oil price shocks whose domestic economic consequences would overwhelm whatever military objective was being pursued. And the potential for escalation to a direct US-Iran confrontation carries risks that extend into domains cyber regional proxy activation, potential Russian and Chinese diplomatic intervention that American strategic planners have not solved and are not eager to test. So Washington calculated correctly from a pure self-interest standpoint that the cost of direct intervention exceeds the benefit and chose restraint dressed in the language of measured diplomacy. This is not a criticism of American decision-making as such. It is a description of how great powers actually behave when alliance commitments collide with genuine self-interest calculations. The problem is the gap between how American alliance commitments have been described as unconditional, automatic, and comprehensive, and how they actually function when the cost of honoring them becomes real. Israel has structured its entire national security architecture around the assumption that American backing is unconditional. The events of last night and Washington's response to them have demonstrated with operational finality that this assumption is incorrect. The American backing is conditional. It is conditioned on the cost of providing it remaining within bounds that American domestic politics and strategic self-interest can absorb.